In this video I'll be highlighting 4 domed structures, 3 of which really lend to shape the new world that has come to be. We begin with the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. We will move on then to the St. Paul's Cathedral in London, followed by the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and we will end with the state capitol in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And this, as just a little warning, if you're coming to this channel with conventional historical ideas, you may be offended by what you are about to see. I will be proposing an alternative timeline and an alternative explanation to what we know of as history. Our story begins with the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Conventional historical accounts will tell us that this was constructed over a many series of years, several popes, almost a half a dozen popes, and orchestrated by some of the great Renaissance artists such as Michelangelo and Raphael, overseen by several architects who seem to die at a very young age along the way. They give us a timeline of groundbreaking from 1506 to completion in 1626. The current structure replacing what previously stood for 1,000 years, built under the reign of Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. So what I propose in this video is that what we are looking at is a distortion of our historical timeline, what appears to be almost a template of events that seem to repeat themselves with these structures. I propose that these structures were in existence and hijacked by a usurping force here in this realm. We are focusing on the 3 seats of power in the Western world and beyond. The St. Peter's Basilica representing the religious power, the spiritual power, the hijacking of the spirit of the people of this realm. And you will see as we proceed through these structures that the timeline tends to shorten on the construction of these buildings as we try to make it fit with the usurper's narrative. So a building such as this, which is constructed over 400 years ago, we have little reason to doubt because we really can't put ourselves in the shoes of the people of the time. We have to take it at face value. We're looking at structures like this. We have to accept that they were built over 400 years ago by some of the greatest artists ever known to us. But as we do this research, we realize that these structures can be found realm-wide, and especially in what we consider to be the New World of the Americas. But you get a sense here of the grandeur. And it's very difficult to believe that several architects had their hands on this, that this was sort of chipped away at over 100+ year period, rather than, and even completed after Michelangelo takes over, completed 60 years after his death. So the story that we're given is very difficult to wrap your head around, which I think is the point, but historians will repeat it as fact. So these are just some images, and there's a lot. I will link a YouTube video of the conventional historical narrative for this building, and you can compare and contrast and see what you think about what we've been told about these structures. The St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, really the anchor again of Western theology. And if we link that in with the founding of the New World and the laying of the groundwork of what would become the world as we know it today, we get into colonialism and the horrors that really are a part of the historical narrative that we've been given. A lot of these structures are really the anchor points for the justification of what has gone on here on this realm. And really the Vatican has become synonymous in our time with the secrets that have been held from the people. And I think one of the major secrets is this timeline distortion that has swept through the lands that we live in. Next up we have St. Paul's Cathedral in London, in the city of London, which would be the financial and monarchical anchor of this usurping force. So if we're looking at a circuit board Earth where everything was sort of an interconnected society, previous civilization, old world, and then we're looking at a post-cataclysm hijacking of the realm, these would be the major anchor points that were taken control of and used to gain control over a devastated realm. This structure, 1675 to 1710. So we do have a shorter time period. This is all linked in with the Great Fire of London in 1666, a very curious date to be sure. We start to get into, as you can see here, the Masonic undertones that run throughout our society, and many of us in this field of research have come to not to trust anything that has any whisper of this imprint, let's say. So Christopher Wren supposedly redesigned the cathedral after the previous one burned to the ground. And we have a historical timeline that places several structures in the spot over the centuries previous, and then you have the wars and the Viking invasions and all these things. I think really reads like almost like an AI imprinted fiction to give us a lengthened timeline. And of course we can't doubt this because none of us can go back in time and see what actually existed. We have to take the word of the historians that are actually coming out of many of these Masonic and Royal Society schools. So either we repeat what we're told or we question the narrative. So here on this channel we question the narrative. And I think they use these previous structures to obscure the fact that these buildings were standing and were not built by these people during these time periods. Let's look at the architecture here in the city of London. Again, the monarchical financial center of power for this usurping force that begins to take hold over the previous centuries. And you can see the absolute majesty that this supposed Sir Christopher Wren, who designed over 50 churches, probably more, I think he or that character is worth a deep dive in itself. We have many of these, what I consider to be Masonic placeholders, And I'm not sure if these people actually existed, or if this is just a complete fiction, or if they're attributing greatness to people that did not deserve to be placed in our history books under the title of greatness. You can see how amazing the structure is and how similar it looks to the Basilica in Rome. And these, of course, are major tourist spots, so they draw our attention, they draw our energy. These are hubs of energy, and the usurpers use this attention and energy to maintain control here in this realm. So Sir Christopher Wren, to give us a little bit of timeline, we have the Great Fire, which burned central London, or the city of London, let's say, to the ground and allowed it to be rebuilt. Again, implying that they were capable of building these structures at that time period. I highly doubt all of this, which sometimes offends people who are married to the historical narrative that they have been trained to repeat. But you can see the similarities in the architectural style. Of course, this building not to be confused with the cathedral in St. Paul, Minnesota. You can see here they give us the timeline for this one, built over a period of 9 years. Just a quick peek, we won't dwell on this. Here's the interior of the cathedral in St. Paul, Minnesota, for those of you that didn't know. But let's get back to the St. Paul Cathedral in London. And a few more visuals before we move on to the US Capitol. And of course the symmetry is absolutely perfect. And of course Christopher Wren, because he was good at drawing, supposedly attributed to all of this architecture. And so much more. Absolutely implausible, unless we have to give this individual superhuman powers. Even then, it's very far-fetched. And you can see in a lot of these buildings, we have the checkerboard floors, which is a clear indication of the Masonic involvement that has been handed down through us through history. St. Paul's Cathedral. We come to the Capitol building in the United States of America. Technically not, I suppose, if it's in the District of Columbia. But this is a very convoluted history we're given for the creation of this building. Beginning, supposedly 1793, George Washington laying a cornerstone. And we have a series of renovations and additions, and we have a fire. Before we get to the fire, let's talk about some of the silliness that goes on with the beginnings of these structures. We have a competition or a contest for designing this structure. Eventually, an amateur architect wins out, supposedly, and is responsible for the original design of the structure. And they're trying to give us all this backstory of the quarries. Here we have the President Washington, along with 8 other Freemasons dressed in Masonic regalia. Well, isn't that nice? Laid the cornerstone, made by silversmith Caleb Bentley. So we're getting a detailed story, but also very difficult to follow and convoluted, I would suggest. The War of 1812 sees the British partially burning the capital to the ground. That conflict with the British. We just finished looking at the cathedral in London, so interesting correlation there. You have to wonder how much of this conflict was manufactured and how much is genuine. There's a whole founding of the United States of America having to do with the breaking from a monarchical rule, but the United States really representing economic and military power in our world today. So I suggest it's the third arm of that triumvirate of the usurper's power. And I think they are having trouble securing and holding the power that they intended to have in the United States. We also have an early dome that was supposedly replaced during the American Civil War, and we have a lot of construction photos from that time period, which many people will say is a clear indication that this was being constructed because they trust what they see in the photos. Here on this channel we have no trust at all in any of this, and I have seen so many photos that appear to be forgeries that I suggest what we're looking at with many of these photos is just that. Very implausible to believe that this is a genuine construction photo. Just not really making any sense the way they have the columns lined up here. Very faint lines, and of course most people, or a lot of people, will attribute the poor quality of the photograph to arising these questions, when really I think there's a disguising going on with that poor quality, where you can assume that it's a legitimate photograph, and that just because the photo didn't turn out perfectly, we just fill in those gaps and believe what we're being shown here with these photographs. But like I mentioned, many of these old construction photographs I find very difficult and implausible to believe that what's going on here is actually the construction of this building. And again, the intent is to obscure the truth about our history. And if you are so inclined to take history at face value, you could be my guest on this channel. That is not what we undertake. Rather, we are questioning the timeline, the intent, the names, and all of the package that we're given of history. Looking at the interior of the Capitol building, there you have the dome, looking very similar to the domes we've seen already in this video. Beautiful structure, impeccable stonework. They do mention that slaves were involved in the construction of this building, so a very implausible timeline. I'll link a video just to highlight the conventional historical narrative of the construction of this building. Here we see some modern day photographs of restoration work, and you could see the enormity and how immense all of this must have been to put together. In the modern day, it really dwarfs our modern day abilities to scaffold and to even get to these places in these structures. You have to wonder how they erected all of this back in the 1800s. I suggest that it's again a historical distortion, let's say. Okay, so this the Capitol building in the United States. Now, we are going to dive now a little deeper into more of what the United States has to offer. This is not the only dome structure in the United States, not even close. Before we feature the Pennsylvania state capitol, I'm going to show you a handful of others. We begin with the Arkansas state capitol, built in 15 years, we're told. California, built in 14 years in the 1800s. You can see the architecture repeating itself. The suggestion here on this channel is that these were founded buildings. They were not constructed within the timelines of what we are being told. Rather, they were usurped by an invading force that seeks to enslave humanity. Connecticut, built in 6 years. And I won't show you the interiors of these, but this one's certainly worth a closer look. And I did do a video on Hartford, where I featured this a little bit more in depth. The Illinois state capitol, they're giving us 20 years. Iowa, featured in my Des Moines video, built in 15 years. 5 domes on this one. Iowa, American Midwest. Kentucky, a 4-year build time on this one. Minnesota, 9 years given to construct this. Amazing structure. Texas, 6 years, 1800s. Horses and cowboys. and Wisconsin into the 1900s. They're giving us 11 years for this to be constructed. Let's shift our focus though to the Pennsylvania state capitol. And the historians give us a build time of 4 years on this one, 1902 to 1906, this structure. And we're going to be taking a look at the interior. But before we do, let's look at the general area, and you can really see what it would take to build this. You can see another dome in the background here. Very interesting. These structures here are looking very old world. And let's look at some of the interiors of this magnificent state capitol building. And you tell me, maybe some of you are wondering why I put this building in a class with the other three. You tell me if it deserves to be there. And I could have done this with many of the other state capitals I just showed you. This is just to illustrate a point. Absolutely ridiculous that we're looking at a 4-year build time on this one, while the previous ones go back several centuries and take however many decades, according to our historical narrative. And this is what I mean by them attempting to squeeze all this into a shortened time period. I think this is where their narrative falls apart, and it's the reason why I focus so heavily on the United States on my channel, because the timeline is not there. Historical timeline is not there. The allowance is not there for all of this to have sprung up so quickly in the means that they say, with the means that they say they had, and with the people they say they had at their disposal to get this stuff done. And the timeline on this also looking much like the Cathedral in London, where you have several structures predating this one on the same spot, we're told, again, to help lend credence to the fact that this was supposedly built within the time frame that we are told. But my suggestion is that this is a deception. And apparently this one was constructed again through the use of a competition to decide, and they had to be local architects to decide who would design the structure. And it's very interesting with many of these as well. We are given the competition date and time. You see here a Capitol Building Commission started in 1901, where they have this competition. Eventually going to this Joseph Miller Houston, who has no presence whatsoever here on Wikipedia. But there's no really time allowance for the drawing up of this building and then the beginning of construction. And that's a big flaw as well in their the timelines we were given on these structures. And this is really a spectacular building, and really, I think it's been sort of tucked away for us to not really notice how beautiful this structure is, as far as I'm concerned. And you can see how impeccable all of the work here is. So I definitely suggest again on this channel that what we're looking at is a fabrication of history, a fabrication of the explanation for many of these structures, Masonic distortions of our historical timeline. And I think this building here is much older, looking very much like the 400-year-old building that featured at the beginning of the video. But no, this one was built in 4 years in the early 1900s, we're told. Of course, no construction photos of this that I could find. And of course, people will tell me, oh, you just have to go to the local archives and they're tucked away for nobody to see unless you have access to those archives. Well, that doesn't do me any good. Those things should be available for all to see. And if they were available for all to see, then it would dispel the questioning of this narrative. But the questioning of the narrative goes on, it continues, because there are gaping holes in what we're being told and what we're seeing. And I'm pleased to bring you the Pennsylvania State Capitol in all its glory and all its precision. There you have a good view of how perfect and precise this building was. Built in 4 years, we are told. Of course not. An absolute fabrication. And there you see what might be dubbed the eagle, but possibly the phoenix rising. Very beautiful, beautiful structure, tucked away in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Alright, I think we come to the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. What do you think? Am I way out in left field on this one, or is there some merit to what we're seeing? The hijacking of the old world structures. Are many of these buildings coming from the same time period, and are they distorting our historical timeline, or is it as they say? Thanks for watching.